I'm Dr. Jeff Allen. I'm the director of the Strom Thurmond Institute, and I would like to welcome all of you to the kickoff lecture for the academic year 2013-2014 Calhoun Lecture Series. I'd like to take just a minute to thank our patrons. This is a lecture series supported by a group of patrons, and we're always very thankful for their support of this program. It wouldn't happen without them. And especially thankful that Mr. Jeff Melton agreed to become the chairperson of the Patrons Council this year. So we're thankful for Jeff. Thank you very much for your support. I'm going to be real quick. I'm not going to tell any stories or anything tonight like I sometimes do and bore you all to death. But I am going to take a minute to introduce our panelists. Our speaker tonight is going to get asked a couple of questions by some very friendly people here over to my left. And we have with us tonight Cadet Carl Eichert, who comes from, he's a senior majoring in physics from Columbia, Maryland, not South Carolina. We have Cadet Alexander Holstead, who is a junior majoring in physics and comes from very nearby, Easley, South Carolina. And Cadet Catherine Stradman, who is a senior majoring in civil engineering, who comes to us from Sumter, South Carolina. So we're very happy to have them here tonight. And I'm going to quickly here turn the program over to Colonel Greg Van Lear, who is going to introduce our speaker this evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege and honor to introduce Colonel Terry Hawkins, retired from the Air Force. Started off life here in the upstate, actually born and raised in Seneca, and decided that he'd go to Clemson. I found out that he was a commuter, so I don't think things change very much. Maybe a little bit easier to commute in and out of Clemson than it is to actually live here. But again, he spent time in Clemson when it was A&M. How many people know that it was A&M? Okay, most of you do. I don't. I never knew that about Clemson, so I think that's great. But he was part of the Air Force ROTC program, got his commission, and went on active duty. Let me tell you a little about what he's doing currently, and then I'll turn the floor over to him. He's been working in New Mexico since 1988 and is currently the senior fellow, senior scientist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. He's currently in charge of global security and held 4 different positions while he was there, or since he's been in Los Alamos. Before his time in New Mexico, Colonel Hawkins worked for the Defense Nuclear Agency. He's a special assistant to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency and held multiple other jobs in the Air Force related to the nuclear field and to the space field. He is an author and co-author of over 64 unclassified reports. I can't tell you about the classified ones or I'll get swept off the stage. And he has served on multiple panels dealing with science and technology intelligence, joint atomic energy intelligence, and national security and global stability, to name a few. In addition to his written work, Colonel Hawkins holds 2 U.S. patents. He retired from active duty as a colonel in 1988 after serving over 25 years. His major decorations include the Legion of Merit, Defense Superior Service Medal with 1 device, the Air Force Meritorious Medal with 2 devices, the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Korean Defense Service Medal, Vietnam Cross of Gallantry with Palm, and it goes on from there. Truly an expert in his field. We look forward to hearing what you have to say this evening, and we're excited to have you kick off this lecture series. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I'm on. I really like that introduction. I would like to meet that gentleman sometime if he were to show up. This device I have here is a very interesting device. It's the only one I've ever used where it has an escape button on it. And so if I make any mistakes, I just hit the escape button and I'm out of here. So that is a good development. And so I'll be talking on a topic that's dear to my heart. It's a topic that deals with our nuclear weapons program in the United States. I've worked either trying to assist our program or understand what other people were doing most of my 50 years in science and technology. And so tonight I'll be talking about a topic that has been my life, most of my life for the last 50 years, and that is nuclear weapons. And when you think of nuclear weapons, different people consider nuclear weapons differently. And I had a very interesting experience once when I was in the Air Force. I'll try to get away from that. I was in the Air Force, and I had given a lecture at Virginia Tech on a topic of interest at that time. That was nuclear winter, whether or not a massive exchange of nuclear weapons between us and Russia would plunge the world into a permanent winter condition. That was a theory at the time. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a bad computer models, which turned out to be the case. But I was giving a talk at Virginia Tech, and I walked into the dining room, and I saw a gentleman I recognized at a table by himself. It was Senator Gore. Senator Gore, the older Senator Gore from Tennessee. And I asked him, did he mind if I joined him for lunch? And Senator Gore said, "Yes, General, please sit down." I was in Air Force uniform and I was a colonel, but he said, I said, "Sir, I am not a general." He said, "You will be for the duration of our lunch." So you should have put that in my bio that I was general officer for about three hours. And so Mr. Gore, Senator Gore, asked me what I did, and I said, "Sir, I work for the Secretary of Defense, and I'm responsible for Air Force nuclear matters that the Secretary might have interest in." He says, "I love nuclear weapons." I never had anyone tell me that they loved nuclear weapons, particularly someone of his stature. And I said, "Would you please explain to me, sir, why you love nuclear weapons?" He said, "Well, it's very simple." He says, "I was elected to Congress in 1935. By 1940, I'd worked my way up to be chairman of the Budget Committee in the House of Representatives. And Sam Rayburn came into my office one day and said, 'Al, I want you to add $500 million to the budget and hide it anywhere you can.'" And he said that was back when, that was a lot of money back then, $500 million. And so he said, "I put money in the road building program, I put money here, I put money there." He said, "Even the Children's Milk Fund doubled." And he said, "I felt great about that latter thing, that I had doubled the milk fund in this country." He says later, 4 years later, he said, "I'd worked my way up, and we were going in 1945. We went into the Pacific to see how the war was going, so we flew into Tinian." He said, "On the way into Tinian," he said, I saw this flotilla of ships getting ready to invade Japan." He said, "There were so many ships there, you could walk from one ship to the next without..." My phone is going off. I'm sure it's my office, but he said you could walk from one ship to the other ship. I hate modern devices. I think there's a plot here. So excuse me. Okay. It was telling me there was a bad storm in Los Alamos, so I need to... But anyway, he said when we flew into Tinian, turn my phone off. When we flew into Tinian, he said, we flew over this ship, and he said there were a lot of Tennessee boys on those ships that would never come home. They would never be there to vote me in office again. He said it was a sad situation. And when we landed at Tinian, we saw beside the runway, we saw they had already started stacking the coffins. He said there were 10 high as far as you could see down the runway. And then we went into a room, he said, and we were briefed by a general. He said, I don't know the guy's name. He wasn't important, so I didn't remember his name. But he told me about how many people they were expecting to be brought in, killed or wounded. And he said, the general said, we have a hospital here at Tinian. We have 3 hospitals. The new hospital has a center corridor that's a mile long. And they were expecting that kind of fatalities coming in from Japan. And he said, all of a sudden, MacArthur came into the room. As only MacArthur could stride into a room, he came into the room, and he dismissed the other general, and he had a smile on his face. And he said, gentlemen, the war will be over by the time you get home. And then he left without any explanation. And so he said, we sat around looking at each other and said, how is this possible? We have all these fatalities, and the war is going to be over by the time we get back to the States. And sure enough, he said, we flew into Hawaii. And he saw the headlines in the paper in Hawaii that the United States had dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And he said to himself, he says, the Children's Milk Fund. I normally don't think of milk funds that way, but he did. He said, this is it. This is the money that we had put aside. This is what produced this weapon. And sure enough, by the time they got back to California, the headline said the second bomb had been dropped and Japan now sues for peace. So all those coffins that he had seen did not have to be used. These weapons had brought an end to the most difficult war and engagement that we had ever been in. And I said, I probably love nuclear weapons also, because my father was on a ship that was going to have to sweep the beaches of Japan before the invasion occurred. His fleet of ships, the fleet he was on, had a probability of surviving of only 20%. So my dad did come back to South Carolina, and he came back in part because of what the Children's Milk Fund had accomplished. So you see, that's the world that I see, and it's a world that other people may not see, but the world I see is the same one that Senator Gore had. It does make a difference. If you look at the history of nuclear weapons, you can see what the world was doing in terms of escalating fatalities in war. We had become very adept at killing each other, and we had become so adept that the fatality rates of war was climbing straight up. And then all of a sudden, nuclear weapons come on the scene, and that growth in fatalities almost died out. This is a statistic that no one can ever deny, that nuclear weapons certainly had caused this change. Of course, it has not completely eliminated war, because war has been with us. As you know, we're engaged in a war today. But all these engagements, despite the fact that the loss of one American is one too many, but the fact is that because of nuclear weapons, the hostilities are not nearly as brutal as they had been before nuclear weapons came on the scene. There are more people, for example, killed in the battle, some of the battles in the Pacific, than our entire engagements in the Middle East. Just one battle. And so nuclear weapons has taken the sting out of war, but it has not prevented war entirely. Even the Cuban Missile Crisis. This major here was a Clemson graduate, and he was the only fatality in the Cuban Missile Crisis, flying a U-2 and was shot down over Cuba. He is the only fatality in that war. Now, other wars have larger numbers of fatalities, but they do not approach even a battle like Iwo Jima in terms of numbers of fatalities. And certainly nuclear weapons have certainly it stalemated the Soviet Union until the Soviet Union died from within. This is probably the most important accomplishment of nuclear weapons, is keeping the expansion of the Soviet Union down. Russia had expanded every year 13,000 square miles since 1450. Every year they acquired that much new territory until the advent of nuclear weapons. And Russia was stopped in its expansive tendencies, and Russia collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed from within as a product of nuclear weapons. Recently, the President has announced that the United States is looking at a smaller nuclear force. He says that the residual force will be adequate, the residual force will be effective, and so forth. And he reaffirms that. But he said we have to move down to lower levels. And that's his option. This talk does not question that decision. It does not suggest that we go to this size of our stockpile or that size of the stockpile. But it does address some of the issues that we must be aware of as we move into this new world. We have to be more careful in terms of some of the decisions we make. And so the talk basically deals with moving into this new world with lower numbers of nuclear weapons. And it looks at things we must be concerned about and must pay attention to as we move to this lower force level. The first thing we have to do is to define the background of negotiations. Where are we today? Where is the world today in terms of nuclear weapons? What situations exist out there today? We can look at these different things here, and we'll go into those one at a time. First is, what are the foreign adversaries doing with their nuclear weapons program? When we look at Russia, we look at a nation that is bent on establishing a very large and enduring nuclear capability where everything is always brand new. The average age of a Russian nuclear weapon, as you'll see later, is only about 5 years old. That's the average. Ours is much older than that, you'll see later. Russia is building new launch systems. They're building this road mobile system. They're putting that in a silo. They're developing a new missile to replace the heavy lifter SS-18. Everything you look at in Russia is brand new, just off the assembly line. New missiles, new transporters, new submarines. This is a new submarine Russia is building. It's a Gore-class submarine. This is a Clemson football field. And this is a new submarine the Russians are building. They're planning to build these, and each one of them will carry brand new nuclear weapons. And on these new submarines that will be built, there will be a total of almost 770 new warheads, new missiles on just these launchers, right? Just those submarines. So Russia is out building new systems. China is following in suit. Every time you look at China, you're looking at new weapon systems, new aircraft, new missiles, new submarines. This particular missile right here is very problematic for the United States. It is a missile that is purposely designed to hit our aircraft carriers and the support vessels for the aircraft that support the aircraft carriers. It is a weapon system that is very accurate and is very able to cause us to change our entire tactics in operating in the Pacific. And so we see China and we see Russia building new systems. Even the environment of the world today is changing to be more confrontational. For the last 8 years, Russia has not conducted any Faker track missions against the United States, where they fly a bomber toward the United States to see how we respond. They used to do that in the days of the Cold War, but then they quit doing it, and they did not do it for about 9 years. Recently, they started flying Faker tracks again to see how we respond. They fly these airplanes in. They've resumed patrolling our coasts with nuclear submarines. That's something else that they had abandoned that they have now reinitiated in the last year. And when we go into the Straits of Hormuz today, we cannot go in the Straits of Hormuz without being confronted by a possible threat there from the Iranians. The Iranians every once in a while put on these mass firings where they show their ability to do mass missile launches. This is one of those missile launches, except in this one they had a failure here, but they photoshopped it out to make it look real. You know, sometimes our foreign adversaries are good at that. When this hit the web, the bloggers helped them out by adding a few more. So you see, the world is getting very complex. If you look at what's happening in Iran, we see the Iranians trying to develop a nuclear capability, as are the North Koreans. They're intent on developing nuclear weapons because they see the potential of nuclear weapons to be a leveraging device in terms of their relationship to other nations. So North Korea is looking at itself as, if we have nuclear weapons, they will treat us with respect. The same thing with Iran. So we see nations busy trying to develop the very articles of war that we have developed here ourselves. Then we have to deal with international terrorism. Almost any place you look on the globe where there are American citizens, American corporations, you'll have to look at a point of a possible attack today. The international terrorists have determined that they're going to make our civilization change itself. One of the goals of terrorism is not to kill a bunch of people, but to create a legacy problem that we have to deal with to cripple our economy and cripple our society and defeat us in terms of the expressive nature of our society in terms of freedom. They want us to make those kinds of things impossible. If you travel on air, you see it every day. I have to take my shoes off because of the shoe bummer. From now on in eternity, I will take my shoes off because of the shoe bummer. Because of the underwear bummer, I have to have myself imaged every time I get on an airplane. That legacy will be there. Every time I get on the airplane, I put my luggage up to be looked at because of the attack on the World Trade Center. So the terrorists have accomplished what they have sought to accomplish, and that is making us change the nature of our society so we become less expressive in our freedoms and less efficient in what we do and how we operate. So we have to come up with some strategy to deal with terrorism where we don't keep these legacy threats as a part of our society. Then we see these cabals that are in the world, everybody shaking everyone's hand, and the only country in this whole thing that has no handshake is the United States. Everyone is trying to figure out how they can position themselves to make the United States weaker. This is a problem we have in terms of our own equipment. It's amazing how old some of the equipment we have today that you guys will be flying when you go into service. You may be flying a B-52. A B-52 was built in 1952, designed in 1952. There are people in the Air Force today who have had grandparents as pilots of B-52s. If you go into a missile silo in California, this is a missile you'll be responsible for. It's the Minuteman. It was designed in 1970. It's still there, still in silos, still ready to go. But it's getting to be an old system. Russia, on the other hand, China, on the other hand, are putting brand new equipment, brand new missiles in silos. And we're keeping these old ones. As I say, they work, but after a while, we need new systems, employing new technology instead of having the old ones. My first job in the Air Force was to deal with the heat shield problem we had on missiles. This was 1965. Russia had determined that they could destroy all of our missiles coming into Russia if we had to fire them, because we had an awful vulnerability of our weapons, in the sense that they were very susceptible to low energy X-rays in outer space. And Russia was planning to bathe our missiles with low energy X-rays and cause the heat shield to fall off. So my first job in the Air Force when I left Clemson was to solve that problem. And a team that I was on of 7 other scientists, Air Force scientists, working for about 3 years, we solved the problem of impulsive blow-off. We solved the problem of nose tip erosion. And now today, if you look at any entry vehicle in the U.S. inventory, it'll be black. And it'll be black because it's made out of carbon fiber and phenolic resin. It was a solution we developed. But we need to look for new solutions to problems, not just the old ones that were successful. And I hope you guys, when you go in, can maybe make some new changes with new equipment and new concepts. This is the oldest bomb, nuclear bomb in our inventory. It was developed in 1963. 1963. That was the year I graduated from Clemson, 1963. And so it is amazing that we still have these old systems. They are still effective. They will still work. But eventually, we need to look maybe for new systems. So let's look at 6 problems that must be avoided as we go into future reductions. The first problem is the problem with numbers per se. Sometimes we're awful in terms of estimating the size of foreign nuclear arsenals. Sometimes we make horrendous mistakes in terms of numbers of weapons that the Russians can have. This is an example. Throughout my early years in the Air Force, this was the projection, this was the image of the U.S. stockpile in blue, and the